So, Mike Donehey, welcome to the Between You and Me podcast. It is so delightful to have you. You have, in the last few months, released your book, Grace in the Grey. But beyond that, you've released other books. People know you from 10th Avenue North, which is where I initially sort of came across your name and your music. So I'm really excited to chat with you sort of about your career and your life as a whole in that way. But for starters, in your own words, who is Mike Donehey?
Um, well, I hope first and foremost I see myself as a child of God, loved in spite of myself. And because I'm loved, I make things. I make music and create things and hoping that all that I do, fathering my daughters, loving my wife, is just the overflow of that realization that I am a beloved son of the Most High. Let's go.
It's so good. I love that. So, your latest book is Grace in the Grey,
Mm-hmm.
which immediately struck me because I'm making it broad generalizations. Christians don't like talking about the grey places. We love being polarized and having a clear cut, this is right and this is wrong. Um, so I saw your title and thought, one, you're approaching this, thank you. Two, it says a lot about the journey you must have been on to get to this place. Can you tell me about the book Grace, Finding Grace in the Grey, and also your journey to writing and then sharing this with the world?
Yeah. Yeah. The evangelical Christian church, in its tenets, would say what you believe matters infinitely. That what you believe about God and Jesus and salvation determines your eternal destiny. So it makes sense that in the church, people get really anxious and fired up about exactness, right? The problem is, it's been my experience that we tend to elevate non essential things to essential status very quickly. And so that's why you have Christians freaking out on each other about things that, if you actually really boil it down, you go, guys, the essentials are actually way fewer and further between than what we're arguing about here. So I think the beginning of the book for me was this one concert we were playing where our band was picketed outside by a bunch of angry people saying we were leading people to Satan because our music was inspired by secular artists. And so obviously we're playing the devil's music. And I heard they were picketers and I said, "Oh, let's go talk to them. That sounds fun." So I went outside and I said, "Hey guys, how's it going?" And they said, "Well, you're playing the devil's music. That's what's going." I said, "Oh, whoa, okay. Well, how do you feel like this approach is going?" As they were screaming at people going into the concert that they were going to burn in hell forever. I said, "How do you feel like this strategy is playing out?" And this is where the genesis of the book began, I think. The guy looked at me and he looked right in my eyes and he said, "It doesn't matter." I said, "It doesn't matter?" He goes, "No. All that matters is that we tell them the truth." And I went back to my dressing room and I thought about that statement for a long time. And I think there's a lot of people who'd agree with him that as long as you're telling someone the truth, that's the most loving thing you could do. So it doesn't matter how offensively you say that truth. But the problem with that approach is it's uh, severely unscriptural, especially if you take Paul's letters with any sort of uh, importance. Paul over and over says things like speaking the truth in love. He says, "If I could recall prophecies and spoken tongues of angels, but had not love, I'm nothing." But even to those, people would say, "Oh, no, no, no. It's still loving to tell the truth." That's what Paul means. But then there's little two sentences that Paul gives Timothy in 2 Timothy. And really, you can skip my book and just read these 2 sentences by Paul. So I'm a little annoyed with Paul because he kind of summarized my whole book in 2 sentences. But he said to Timothy to correct your opponents. We love that. But then he adds this caveat. He says, with all gentleness. And I did a research on the Greek there, with all gentleness. And it turns out it means with all gentleness. And he says, perhaps God will grant them repentance leading to the truth. So here's the thing. The reason we get so angry with each other is because we don't believe perhaps God will grant the repentance leading to the truth. We think it's up to us to change people and change their mind and change their thinking and save them. But what Paul's saying is the reason you can correct with all gentleness, like that the way you say something is as important as what you're saying. The reason is because God's the one who actually saves people anyway. Mm-hmm. And so in a sense, the pressure's off. And now I can actually come to people and I can be kind. As Paul says before that, he says, be kind to everyone, patiently enduring evil. And so that really got me thinking about even the way that I comment back to people on social media. Yes. Like, am I correcting with all gentleness? And that's a question we all have to kind of consider for ourselves.
Yes. That just sounds challenging in itself. I've got questions, so I'm just thinking because I'm like, I relate to that so much, but I think many questions can.
And as a musician, that this makes sense to me more than most, because as a musician, what do you consider in a song? You consider the lyric and the melody, and you respect how the lyric and the melody are meant to be in this synergistic relationship, and that the right melody with the wrong lyric or the right lyric with the wrong melody doesn't hit you as hard. And yes. So I'm used to the way I'm saying something and what I'm saying are meant to be dancing together. And I think a lot of non-musicians don't consider that as much.
Yeah, absolutely. What was your journey to coming to that realization for yourself? Because looking at the presser and even some of the suggested questions that I could ask you, it sounds like your journey to extending grace to speaking with gentleness has probably been a long and windy one.
Absolutely. Yeah, my family is super argumentative. I remember the first time my wife came over for a holiday and she was crying in her room and she goes, "Why are you guys all so angry at each other?" And we're not angry. This is just the way we talk, And so I had to unlearn some habits that I had even from my own family. And I always say, I learned to love disagreement and learn to disagree with gentleness because 1, I'm married, 2, I have 4 daughters, and 3, I was in a band for 20 years. And when you're in a band, like, music is horribly subjective. And so you'd be in these debates and you can't win because someone could go, "I don't like that chord." And they're not wrong. You can't say that's wrong to not like that chord. And so writing songs and making music with other individuals has really informed me that sometimes what you say and how you say it are way more important than you'd think.
Yes. Something that crossed my mind when I was preparing for this interview was that your lifetime of experience career in church, in Christian music, as a musician, now as an author, speaker, podcaster, you are very well acquainted with the church, but also the industry that comes along with the church and the commoditizing of it. And I say that in a good and bad way because technically we're both part of it. It's part of like what we do, we create, we hopefully sell a few things. All, we're all part of it. But my reflection as a journalist anyway, in seeing people in that industry, particularly in Christian music, is that uh, the probably safest way to sell records, to find a safety net of community is probably to take a somewhat polarized view, or sort of like make yourself look like you're standing in a certain ballpark and just steer clear here. You can't touch anything else. And it's totally valid because you need to feed your family and you can still create art. But the moment we see people start to push against that or even ask questions, um, we have a, I guess, an environment in the church, in our church culture, where we don't really hold space for questions. We start to freak out and we sort of start to put negotiables as non-negotiables, which can result in, like Christian musicians feeling like their artistry is stifled. They walk away from the faith. There's sort of like this underbelly in Christian music. There's so many facets that people can experience in every area of their life, but we know in Christian music that this is very present because we like to have a very polarized view that is connected to how we make our money. That's my
Yeah.
reflection. Before I ask you a question, have I got that accurate? I'm not trying to throw you under the bus. I just want to get your feedback.
I think there are definitely some artists who have discovered that nuance is harder to sell. And so they'll
Yeah.
pick a side and they'll dig their heels in real deep, because if they
Yes.
can get all of that side to get in their boat, then they'll sell more records.
Oh
Absolutely.
yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
but then some artists just really believe certain things, and it just
Hmm.
so happens that them spouting off what they believe really boosts up their numbers. And then so it's sort of like a self-fulfilling chicken before the egg prophecy, where
Yeah.
you there's a I
Yeah.
think it's a Mark Twain quote, and he said, "The hardest man to convince of something is one whose job depends on him not understanding it."
Hmm.
Did you hear that?
Oh yeah.
The hardest man
Oh
to
yeah.
convince of something is one whose job depends on him not understanding it. So I don't even know if some musicians it's like a willful push to one side or the other, as much as it's like, I mean, that's tough. Who knows? But I guess I just believe what this group always says.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I mean, I there's a very famous singer in our space who, I mean, he was berating me the other day in my messages because he felt like one of the things I said in one of my videos wasn't doctrinally sound. And so, and I don't know why he thinks it's his job to police the industry.
Yeah.
Um, but the point I was making, and I had some friends who very famously deconstructed their faith to the point of saying, I don't even know how I feel about Jesus anymore.
Yeah.
And I was really forced to, a lot of people kind of said, how dare you still be friends with them? How dare you, uh, you know, commiserate or commune with backsliders? And this was
Yeah.
the tension point someone had with me. I cited the parable where Jesus said, there's a guy with a field of wheat, and an enemy plants weeds in the wheat. And then the workers, they see all the weeds growing up in the wheat, and they beg the boss. They say, can we go tear out all the weeds? We're really good at tearing out the weeds. And the boss, I liken him to the Godfather. He kind of goes, no, leave them in there. Leave in the weeds. And they're like, leave in the weeds? What are you talking about? Leave the weeds in, because if you go around trying to pull out all the weeds, you're gonna pull out all the wheat too.
Wow. Yeah.
And in my when Isaiah says that Jesus, a bruised reed he will not break, and a flickering flame he will not quench. I take that to mean, and I think about that parable, that it's not my job to rip all the weeds out, unless someone is adamantly saying, I definitely don't want Jesus, I hate Jesus, I don't want anything to do with him. If they're still in a space of flickering or
Hmm.
bruisedness, like, well, maybe, I don't know. I don't think it's my job to kick them out or kick them to the curb. my job is to say, how can I serve you? How can I convince you that you are a wheat? You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah. And I say that all the time. Like, uh, I had a pastor friend. He said to me, "No, you know what? It was a former artist, and he texted me and he said, the work you're doing in this book is more radical than being radical." He
Mm-hmm.
said, being nuanced and curious
Yeah.
is way more radical than just standing in allegiance on one of the polarities.
Oh yeah.
And I think Jesus really demonstrates that to us, that he's having dinner with tax collectors, you know, who were allegiant to Rome, and then he's calling Simon the Zealot, who would have been killing people like Matthew the tax collector.
Yeah.
And then he's hanging out with prostitutes and unclean folk and lepers. So that would have put him at odds with the Pharisees. And then he was hanging out with the Pharisees, which would have
Yeah.
put him at odds with all the other people I just mentioned. So it was almost like Jesus kept shooting himself in his own foot
Mm-hmm.
because he was intent on having his reputation soiled by who he would align himself with.
Yeah.
And so I got to be really careful. Jesus ate dinner with all kinds of people. And in doing so, he's saying, you're
Mm-hmm.
my kind of people. So is that the way I'm living my life? Or am I careful to curate my platform to make sure people know whose side I stand on?
Wow, that's challenging. Yes, that is really good in a really hard way. Um, as you release this book, as you release podcast episodes, there's a sense that I'm not sure if you're forging new territory, but you're stating what needs to be said, the nuance, the grey, the conversations that so many people in the church are wanting to have but aren't always having. Now, that's not everywhere, obviously, but a lot of people. Um, and I'm curious about what sort of cost that comes at to you, because I mean, obviously, this is how you feel led to live. You live by this conviction. This is how you love well. Um, but what sort of personal, societal, but like even like career wise, what is the cost to you? Because sometimes you can say things that seem, I mean, for me, who I generally lean left, so for me I'm just like, oh yeah, great. But you can say some things and people will just go, whoop, yep, never listening to you again, burning your CDs. And so there's a lot of risk with every word that you say. What impact has taking this honest, authentic way of following God in the grey, the middle, the I'm not going to burn you in hell? What does that look like for you in your life?
Right. You're constantly debating, what are the things that I believe and what are the things I believe that I feel like I need to share. And what things, when I
Yeah.
share it, do I know will instantly take away the space that I had to speak to people. That, like you were saying,
Mm.
as soon as you disagree with someone too sharply, unfortunately, a lot of people's knee jerk reaction now is just to block you or unfollow you or mute you. And so you're always trying to figure out that dance of, if I get on my Instagram and say, I want less women to have abortions, there's a huge group of people who would not listen to me. And then in the
Mm-hmm.
next breath, I'd say, I also want less people to have assault rifles. Then there's a huge group of people who leave me, and they wouldn't even take the time to ask questions about, well, what do you mean by that? Like, in what ways? Like, what should be legislated? Like there, and that's a really, especially in America, there's a really, it's really difficult for people to see the difference between what I think is right and wrong and what I think should be legislated.
Yes.
And those things aren't necessarily lining up in an exact way, right? Um, but I'm always, I've written a blog. I wrote a blog one time. The Supreme Court, made homosexual marriage legal in America.
Mhm.
That was like what, 6 or 7 years ago. I forget. But I wrote an article called "To Hear or Be Heard." Um, partly because my brother identifies as being gay, and so I've learned a lot through him of like how he has felt from the evangelical culture. So I wrote an article just saying to hear or be heard, and just saying to all my brothers, evangelical brothers and sisters in America, hey guys, I don't think this is a moment to bemoan and berate and scream about your position on this. I'm pretty sure the gay community knows how you feel.
Mhm.
Maybe this would be a time to like listen, you
Yeah.
know. And I had a program director reached out through my label and said, "Hey, can I talk to Mike about this article he wrote?" And he goes, "Yeah, sure." And I get on the phone with this guy and he says, "Hey, I need to know what you mean by your article because, quote, it would be a shame to never play any of 10th Avenue North's music again."
Mhm.
So, there's times where I'm having to go, man, I didn't even say in this article, I think this, that. I just say, hey, let's all listen better right now. And even that was, you know, for him, he was ready to pull all of my music off his platform.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but I found it to be true that if you can dig down in your bones and figure out when you really feel like it's your time to speak, and you don't let being misunderstood dictate what you will and won't say, because that's sort of an idol that we all have to learn to let go of, is coming to the conclusion that we're always going to be misunderstood, and so it's okay.
Yeah.
Jesus was very misunderstood, horribly misunderstood. They thought he was coming to destroy Rome, and he was looking to do something completely different. So that frees me up to speak with conviction about things when I feel like it's within my realm to speak.
Mhm.
Um, that's another thing that Paul tells Timothy in that passage. He says, God's servant must be able to teach. And that I always hit that, like, not every topic or every cultural thing or every news article, not if I am speaking on everything that ever happened socially, you can be assured that I actually don't care about anything.
Yeah.
I don't have that much capacity as a human.
Yes.
Um,
Yes,
but
absolutely.
when I speak to those places that really hit me, I found that I lose followers, but then you gain other followers.
Mhm.
And the best thing I can do, I've posted a number of things over the years that people misunderstood or got angry about. And the one habit that I got into this one habit or this routine, this practice, where when someone would post a really inflammatory remark, I would just, instead of deleting it or debating angrily, I've learned to go, please tell me more about how you came to that conclusion. Question, 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 question. And then what ends up happening is a lot of times I end up getting to pray for people, because
Yeah.
you unpack and realize, oh, this person was really hurt by so and so or something. And that's usually the vitriolic response that we are met with when we're disagreeing. It's usually something in their story more than it is in what you're
Yeah.
discussing.
Yeah. Um, Thank you. I have a few random popcorn questions for you, but before I jump to them, is there anything else that you wanted to say, or would you like me to ask about your book?
The only thing I want to say is, well, first acknowledge that there is gray. As Western Greek thinkers, we don't, especially Christians, we just don't read scripture the way Jesus was looking at it. as an Easterner. Just they hold tension and polarity and duality just so much different than we do. Um, and just ask yourself, could I become a person who loves being critiqued? Because Proverbs, I think it's the most repeated line in Proverbs. I mean, there's a couple things that get repeated a lot, but in the book of Proverbs, it says over and over and over, a wise man loves correction. It doesn't say a wise man endures correction because he knows it'll be good for him. It says he loves it.
Wow.
He hungers for it. He wants it. And it's funny because I've told people that I get a lot of stories of people who've been hurt in church. And they say, man, I'm trying to find a place like a healthy church. Do you have any suggestions? I said, the one thing I would encourage you to do, there's a lot of things I could say, but the first thing I would encourage you to do is find a church where they love and welcome criticism, because that will be a safe place.
Yes. Yeah, that's so good. Totally relate to that as well, the challenge of that, and trying to find a church like that, and then developing trust, because you can still go to a community, but when you've gone through that hurt, you still have to develop a trust and a willingness to know that people will still disagree with you. And there's an
Yeah.
element of like figuring out when that's healthy and when that's not.
Yeah, but can I be a person who curates that myself? Could I become more like leaning in? The first chapter in the book is called Leaning In. Could I actually lean into criticism?
Oh man.
And a lot of us. So the last thing I would say is a lot of us just wrongly think that disagreement is a sign of unhealth in our relationships. Disagreement is the sign that you're actually in a relationship to begin with.
Yes.
Because if everyone in your life agrees with you 100% of the time, you're in a relationship with yourself.
That's true. And that's awkward and so true to know. Yes. Okay, not to take away from what we just talked about, but my quick questions. One, tell me about the version of Yeshua, Friend of Sinners, that you just released with Gillian Edwards.
Yeah.
Tell me about that
Yeah.
song and the recording process, because I know her daughter came into the recording session as well, which looked adorable.
Oh my goodness. I was just such a gift, that whole thing. I put that song out. I still really believe in that song. Just feels like a kiss from God. That song kind of just fell out of the sky to me one day. And I started playing it on this little acoustic tour. I was out with David Leonard and Josh Baldwin and Mac Powell, and we did this little singer-songwriter tour for 3 weeks. And David would play piano while I played that song. So it was just me and him. And it just had this whole different sort of quality. And I said, David, would you be willing to record this version with me? Because I love it. Just feels almost like a different song when we do it like this. And he said, oh, yeah, man. And so then I got thinking, and I'd been listening to some Gillian Edwards stuff, and I'm friends with her husband, and she's friends with David. And I said, hey, when I come down, do you think Gillian would come over and record it with us? And he said, yeah, you can ask her. So I called her, and she was so gracious, and I think she just takes it to a whole nother planet.
Yeah, beautiful, love it. I spoke to years ago now. I spoke to Gillian, and she was just so gracious and kind and steady, and she just brings that to the song.
Steady is that's a good descriptive for her.
Yeah. My second question: what is the funniest or most embarrassing moment you've ever had on stage that you can share publicly?
Right. That's a great question that you can share publicly, because I have plenty of them. Probably the most fun, we were at an amusement park festival show.
Ooh.
And we're there. Jeremy Camp was there. Lecrae was there. A lot of artists. And we were playing. And I jumped down off stage. And I like to go in the crowd and giving high fives and singing to people. And I went to jump back up on stage. It was a very high stage. And I was wearing these new pants my wife had just bought me. So I hadn't tested the the flexibility of the fabric. And when I went to jump up on stage, the whole from belt loop to back belt loop split in half my pants. And I suddenly felt a breeze coming through the wind, and I put my pants together, and we were about to start the next song, and we start the next song, and I'm standing there like, I don't know how I'm going to get out of this. And then the Lord had mercy on me. This thunderstorm comes out of nowhere and starts dumping torrential rain, and they had to cancel the rest of the day. And we ran off stage, and I was able to change my pants.
Wow. Do you think they would? Someone could make a lot of money selling like jeans and pants that musicians can wear with their stage dive. It could be. I'm sure someone in Nashville is creating that. It just feels like right up someone's niche there.
Well, the thing is, jeans do the trick. Jeans are fine. I should have stuck with jeans, and I went to these khakis, and strictly no more khaki. I never wore khakis again after that.
No, it's straight back to denim every time.
Yeah.
All right, last question. If you could go back in time to the day before you released your first album with 10th Avenue North, what would you tell yourself knowing what you know now?
Oh man, I think I would just say enjoy it and just be there. We Yeah, we had such a wild run when our band started. We had a lot of success, just boom, 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 to the point where we just didn't even realize we were having success. We just went, yeah, this is what happens when you put out music. Everybody listens to it, blah, blah, blah. And we had been an independent band for 8 years before, so it wasn't like we weren't grateful and didn't know what it was like for nobody to care about your music, because we did. But yeah, I wouldn't warn myself or tell myself anything different, because like I'm grateful for the mistakes we made too now, seeing how God just redeems. He just redeems, Um, maybe I would tell myself, you've made it. I remember those first 5 or 6 years, whenever I got on stage with other artists, I just felt so inferior. If I got on stage with Amy Grant or with Toby Mac and now you get to a place where you realize, oh, none of them looked down on me. They were all welcome. We love what you're offering, And so maybe I would say, sorry, I'm answering this very long, but probably just compare yourself less and just be comfortable in your own skin and what God's given you to offer people.